Good morning, afternoon, and evening. All of you who have joined this webinar today from different parts of the world, welcome to an insightful session on soil stewardship, a pathway to climate change mitigation, organized by Solidaridad Asia. Climate change is a growing concern across the world. Atmospheric CO2 concentration has been on a perpetual rise, and so are the other greenhouse gases. Contrary to the common perception, fossil fuels are not the only predominant sources of the pollutant atmospheric carbon dioxide. In fact, just adopting renewable energy and reducing fossil fuel emissions are not going to stop climate change. It is extremely important at this point in time to take notice of the fact that soil, vegetation, and trees contribute equally, if not more, to the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. However, unlike the fossil fuel-induced emissions, the CO2 released from soil, trees, and vegetation can actually be reversed. Today, in this session on soil stewardship, a pathway to climate change mitigation, we at Solidaridad are honored to have the privilege of hosting two of the stalwarts in agricultural science. Our first guest today is Mr. André Leu, who is joining us from Australia. André is the International Director of Regeneration International, an organization that promotes food, farming, and land use systems that regenerate and stabilize climate systems and the health of the planet and the people. Prior to this, André was the longest serving president of IFOAM, Organics International, which is the world change agent and umbrella body of the organic sector. He is currently an IFOAM ambassador and the author of two prominent books in agricultural science, Poisoning Our Children and The Myths of Safe Pesticides. Our second guest of honor today is a prolific soil scientist and recipient of the prestigious 2020 World Food Prize, which is the Nobel equivalent in food and agriculture, Professor Dr. Rattan Lal. Dr. Lal is a distinguished university professor at the Ohio State College of Agricultural and Environmental Sciences and is the founding director of what is now known as the CFAES Rattan Lal Carbon Management and Sequestration Center. In a career spanning more than 5 decades and 4 continents, including Africa, Asia, and Latin America, Dr. Lal has promoted innovative soil-saving techniques benefiting the livelihoods of more than 500 million small farmers, improving the food and nutritional security of more than 2 billion people, and saving hundreds of millions of hectares of natural tropical ecosystems. Dr. Lal is here with us, joining today from the US. Today's session is scheduled for 90 minutes, with 5 minutes of welcoming and introduction, followed by about 50 minutes of the guest speakers' presentations. The final 35 minutes will involve panel discussion and Q&A from audience. Please note that the chat tab has been disabled. Please put your questions in the Q&A box on the panel at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Today's session will be moderated by Mr. Rajiv Verma, who is a veteran sustainable agricultural professional himself, with more than 4 decades of experience across commodities like cotton and tea. Rajiv has previously worked with Better Cotton Initiative, has been the managing director of BioRay India, the organization that pioneered organic cotton production in India, and is presently associated with Solidaridad as a senior advisor for cotton. Now, I would request Rajiv to take over the session here onwards. Thank you.
Anamita, thank you very much. I would just quickly like to bring a perspective as to why Solidaridad Asia is bringing this very, very important webinar to all of you. As you probably know, Solidaridad Asia works with several commodities, which is tea, castor, fruits and vegetables, soybean, palm oil, sugarcane, and cotton, of course. Agriculture, as most of you know, is contributing 11 to 15% of global emissions, which are essentially caused by industrial farming practices that rely on chemical nitrogenous fertilizers, heavy machinery that run on petrol and diesel, and highly concentrated industrial feedlots. An excellent research paper by Grain in 2009 has shown that if right policies and incentives were in place worldwide, soil organic matter content, which I call SOM, and those from Indian backgrounds will know SOM as a nectar from the Rig Veda, could be restored to pre-industrial levels within a period of 50 years, roughly the same time it took to reduce it. The continuing of good soil management practices would allow the offset of 24 to 30% of global annual greenhouse gas emissions. Wow, that's substantial. Solidaridad Asia, with its various interventions in agriculture, would like to bring the focus back to soil and not oil. We want to bring soil stewardship to the forefront. And with this short introduction, I'd like to invite André Leu, who joins us from Brisbane, and it's 11 p.m. back in Brisbane. So André, over to you, and thank you very much for accepting our invitation.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for having me. It is a pleasure for me to be here. And what we're talking about is very important. In fact, climate change is far more important in the long term than the current pandemic that we're all experiencing. Okay, I hope everybody can see my screen now. And
yes.
Okay, so what I'd like to talk about is this year we actually set a new record of 417 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. That was in Lal in Hawaii in May this year. So despite this pandemic and despite the slowdown, the amount of carbon dioxide going up in the atmosphere is still a record. It's actually, the graph I've got at the top there is looking at the amount of CO2 based on ice cores, and there's 800,000 years of them. And it's never really gone up over 300 parts per million. So when you start going back to try and find out, well, when did it go up to 400 parts per million? The last time we got close to it, and that was 380 parts per million. That was between 3 million, 3.5 million years ago, according to papers published in the journal Nature. And these are very good papers, and one of them by Rowling and his co-authors. The work they did, they actually found that temperatures were between 5, at the lower limit was 5 degrees warmer, and up to 16 degrees warmer at times during this period. And sea levels were between 20 to 30 meters higher. Now just think about that, what that means to major cities around the world, you know, a city like Chennai, or, you know, what would happen to Kerala, or we look at Bangkok or Manila, Ho Chi Minh, New York City, London, the Netherlands, Bangladesh, we're actually talking about billions of climate change refugees. It's a world where we won't have the resources to cope. And at the moment, in the last decade, the carbon dioxide levels have been increasing by between 2 to 3.3 parts per million every year. And it's, you know, the fact is things are getting worse despite the Paris Agreement. Now, Paris Agreement now has a target of net zero emissions by 2050. Well, at the rate we're going to be close to 500 parts per million before we get to net zero. And according to many scientists, we have already crossed multiple tipping points towards catastrophic climate change. Ending fossil fuels and adopting renewable energy, that must be non-negotiable. However, it's not enough. Getting to zero net emissions in 30 years' time will not stop catastrophic climate change, because the legacy emissions, the carbon dioxide we already have in the atmosphere, will continue to increase heat for more than 100 years. It'll take more than 100 years for the levels to start going down naturally. We have to start drawing this carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere if we're going to stop catastrophic climate change. And at the moment, it's around 25 gigatons a year that we need to take out just to stabilize things at 417 parts per million. We actually need to do more than that to start reducing it. So let's look at the options. And soils are the greatest carbon sink after the oceans. The oceans are actually the greatest carbon sink, greatest sink for carbon dioxide, but we already have too much carbon dioxide in the oceans. It's acidifying it and causing major problems. Where I live in Northern Australia, we have the Great Barrier Reef, and that's suffering because of climate change, of which the acidification is actually dissolving the corals, the reef, and many of the other organisms that use calcium for their skeletons. The soils have around 2,700 gigatons of carbon worldwide. There's different sources. This particular source I use because this is from a paper by Dr. Lal. And I personally am a great supporter of the research that Dr. Lal has done. And this is a very good figure. We have about 575 gigatons in biomass, most of it is wood, forests, and currently in the atmosphere at 417 parts per million, that's around 900 gigatons. But what I want to show there is that the soils hold almost 3 times the amount of carbon as all the carbon in forests and the atmosphere combined. The soils are the logical place to put our excess carbon dioxide, and it's where we need it. And what I want to talk about now is what I'll call the best practice regenerative systems. We have a lot of systems that can take carbon dioxide out and put it into the soils. I don't think we have time to waste on the ones that aren't the best examples. So I just want to give you some of the documented best examples. And firstly, I've given you the bad news. I do want to give you good news. And this is that we already have a global initiative to start changing farming from one, as Rajiv said in his introduction, is a major emitter of greenhouse gases, to turn it to a major mitigator using photosynthesis to take it out of the atmosphere and put it into the soil. And this was signed, launched in Paris in December 1, and by the French government, and as part of the United Nations framework, climate change agreement. It's under what's called the Lima Paris Accord, and so far there's 48 countries and regions, the United Nations Food and Agriculture, IFAD, the Global Environmental Facility, the World Bank, and others have signed on to it, as well as hundreds of NGOs. And I also want to point out that Professor Lal had a major role in this initiative. And I'm also proud that I'm actually one of the physical signatories on this document in Paris in December 1. I actually, one of the people who signed it, and someone who's continuing to promote it because it is so important. So let's now just talk about how we do this. And the main way that we do it is through photosynthesis. We use solar energy, the power of sunlight, to combine carbon dioxide and water to create the most important molecule on the planet, glucose. And glucose is the basis of the food system. It's the molecule that we use not just for our energy system, but it's used for building carbohydrates and hydrocarbons, oils and proteins and all the others, molecules that we need for life. It's why I call these the molecules of life. And what we know is around 30% of these carbon compounds that are fixed through photosynthesis, the plants make glucose, and then they also use solar energy to synthesize these other compounds. And around 30% of them are shed through the roots to feed the soil microbiome, the living organisms in the soil. And we have a word for that. Quite a few words. One is the liquid carbon pathway. Another one is the carbon gift. And we use it for, if we do it properly, we use it for putting carbon into the soil. And I want to give you some examples now of cutting edge ways of doing it. And this is one of the ones we do in Australia. We call it pasture cropping. It's an example of what we call no-kill, no-till systems. We don't need to use herbicides. In this case, perennial pastures are used, are grazed down or cut down, and then annual crops are sown in it. And it works on the principle that annuals grow in perennial systems. And I haven't got time to explain how to do it, but the main thing I want to show here is that this system actually gets the same yields as industrial systems, but without the use of all the fertilizers and herbicides and plowing. Really important, what I want to talk about here is the research into how quickly it can build up carbon and also soil nutrients. If you have a look at the picture here, this is 2 soil samples. And why this is important is because the fields where they're taken from were originally the same farm. When the father passed away, the sons inherited it, and they put a fence down the middle of the field. And one side used standard grazing and standard tillage practices to grow the crops. The other one uses the pasture cropping. And you can just see by the color, the darker color is the deeper carbon. And where this is important, if you just measured the top layers, there's not a lot of difference between the 2 samples. But when you start going down deeper, you can see what happens when you have these perennial systems, the amount of carbon that the roots deposit into the soil. What they achieved was around 8 tons a hectare of an average increase of 8 tons a hectare of soil organic matter per year. It's actually about 16.8 tons of, equivalent to 16.8 tons of carbon dioxide per hectare per year that had sequestered. This is 10 years of measurements. And what I've done here, just so you can understand the importance of it, if we start thinking about doing these on a global level, this is what we call a back of the envelope calculation. It's not designed to be scientific proof. It's just to explain essentially the potential of these systems in helping us reverse climate change. In this case, if we were to extrapolate it across FAO agricultural lands, that's equivalent to 82 gigatons a year, more than 3 times of what we need to do. What you'll see there is also the increase in nutrients. I haven't got time to go into great detail about these systems, but this is another example of the same type of pasture cropping. Here, this person has actually invented a better system for breaking up the root mass in the perennial pastures, so you can sow in the cash crop or the cover crop into it. Where this one is important is that using the Australian government system verification for measuring soil carbon, which is one of the most comprehensive on the planet, what they've done now is they're paying him carbon credits for what he's sequestered. He's actually the first farmer on the planet to be paid carbon credits for soil carbon under a government mandated system. In 2019, he was paid for 11.2 metric tons of carbon dioxide per hectare per year. And this year, he received for 13 metric tons. In other words, he increased it with this system. The other thing I'd just like to point out with all these systems is that there are really big increases in productivity in production as well. It's another co-benefit. Another very important co-benefit of increasing soil organic matter is climate resilience, because the fact is, all of us now are suffering from climate change with all the weather extremes, the longer droughts, the flooding rains, and building resilience is essential. We actually have good science, lots of papers on the multiple benefits of increasing soil organic matter for improving resilience. I've just put some of them here. I'm not going to go through them all. I think it's more important I just give you some examples of scientific field trials. This is a field trial in Switzerland, a long-term field trial. It's actually year 16. And one method is using organic agriculture and incrementally increasing soil organic matter. The other one is using best practice conventional. It's been supervised by one of the universities. It's rained just after planting, and you can see that the conventional soil has eroded. That crop had to be replanted, otherwise, it would be a total failure. The organic crop soil there continued to grow, didn't need replanting because it had minimal damage. And the reason why I show you here, this is work done on another long-term sites. In this case, this is the Rodale Institute in Pennsylvania in the USA. We're looking at a difference in soil, once again, around year 16, where you've had the incremental increases in organic matter. And you see that if you get the soil with the higher levels of organic matter and put it in water, it keeps its integrity. It actually absorbs water, holds it. The soil with the lower levels of organic matter doesn't keep its integrity. It falls apart, disperses, and erodes. And if we dive deeper into why, this is an electron microscope picture of humus, which is one of the components of organic matter. And if you look at it here, you can actually see it's a sponge. And this gives it the ability to hold up to 30 times its own weight in water. So up to 30. Humus is a bit like snowflakes. It's very complex. It's all different types in their ability, but there is very good research on its ability to hold water and, very importantly, give it back to the crop. It's also a polymer. It is sticky, and that's really important. That gives it the ability to hold the soil particles together. Also, the stickiness is electrostatic charges. It allows it to hold the nutrients in so that they don't get leached out. It's very important in holding the fertility, storing the nutrients, and keeping the soil stable. So it's one of the really important ones in this case, and this is very important for India and for Asia, but actually for most of the world. The fact is that close to 98% of the world's agriculture is still rain-fed and will continue to be. This is work done in Australia, and it's what we call a good rule of thumb, back of the envelope calculations, because different soil types with organic matter will hold different amounts of water, but this is a good enough approximation for people to understand the importance of increasing soil organic matter to hold water. So a lot of places in the world, when we look at the levels of soil organic matter, we've got 1% or less. That means when it rains, you'll hold around 160 litres per hectare in the first 30 centimetres. After that, it's the best way is to imagine it like a cup. After that, it all runs off, usually runs off in this case with all the soil as well, into the rivers and creeks and pollutes it. If we can start increasing the levels of soil organic matter, we can significantly increase the amount of water we can store. So I've gone up between 5 and 6% here, 6%. In my own farm, I went from 1% to 6% in improving it. You can hold up to around a megaliter per hectare in the root zone. And I want people to think about that. Where's the best place to hold a megaliter water? Underneath our crop. You don't need to build dams. You don't need to build expensive irrigation systems and canals. It doesn't get better than this, that you can capture that rainfall and hold it. And this is an example of some of the science, one of the field trials, where the Rodale Institute, year 16, there's a drought. If you have a look here, the difference is this is the same field, same variety of corn. The difference is management. The organic corn here doesn't know it has a drought because it's got all that stored water. The conventional one is struggling. And the independent peer review of the systems found that during drought years, these organic systems ended up getting something like 30% higher yields on average because of this ability to hold water. And this is really important as with going into climate change. The fact is we get these, our rainfall comes out of season. It tends to be short and extreme and do damage. If we can have systems that can keep the integrity of the soil and capture that water and store it for the long term, we're going to have much more resilient systems. I just want to finish off on a few other ones, which I think is really important. I chose this one because this is very relevant to most of the farmers in the world. The majority of the farmers in the world have 2 hectares or less land. This is in the United States. It's actually around half a hectare. It's 2.5 acres, and just under half a hectare. And this is the research done by Chico State University, this is in California, found that they had increased their soil organic matter from 2.4% to an optimal, 7-8% in 6 years. The system here uses, it's another case of what we call no-till, no-till, by using mulching and composting and just growing in these beds and crop rotation and highly biodiverse systems. They achieve very high levels of increasing organic matter. The other one I want to say, this little farm, they started off with 40 acres and went to this intensive systems instead. They employ 8 people and they earn around 200,000 US per year. I think this is really important to get across when people say, oh, small farms can't be viable. Small farms can be very viable with the right techniques. And, I did another back of the envelope calculation on this. If we extrapolated globally by the United Nations Food and Agriculture numbers for arable and permanent croplands, it would sequester 179 gigatons per year. Now, I'm not trying to say that this is what is going to happen. I'm just trying to give you, the potential, if we can just start getting farmers to change, that we can start drawing carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Sorry, it's not changing. No. The last one I just want to talk about, and I think this is very important because 68% of designated agricultural lands by the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization are rangelands, and they're some of the most degraded systems on the planet. And we have now very good science on regenerative, holistic grazing management, on how we can regenerate these rangelands and increase their production. Here's some pictures here. Once again, I haven't got the time to go into the details of how this is done, but I just want to give you an idea of the potential. This is another peer-reviewed paper. It's done in Arizona, and it looked at 3 different farms over a period of 3 years. And what they found is when they changed the grazing methods into these regenerative grazing systems, that they could sequester around 30 tons of carbon dioxide, 30,000 kilograms of carbon dioxide per hectare per year. And once again, just the back of the envelope calculation on the grazing lands of the world, that's around 98.5 gigatons. So what I want to end on, I'm not trying to say that these systems can all be scaled up and you can do it evenly. It's not. What I'm trying to put across is that we actually do have good examples of best practice, high yielding systems that can sequester carbon dioxide. And what we need to do is look at how we can scale them up and around the world. And in the end, if we can start working on these best practice systems and scale them up, we don't have to change all of agriculture. We could change a small proportion, what we call the early adopters, and start making a difference to the amount of carbon dioxide that we can take down, and start building these resilient agricultural systems. We can start looking at reversing climate change, looking at we need to go to negative emissions, and we can do that by changing farming from being a major problem to a major solution. And the other one is all these systems I showed can produce higher yields of healthy food with no chemicals. And the other thing I want to say here, these are shovel ready solutions. So this really is a good news story. You know, in the middle of, you know, what is bad news, we actually have some very good news for the future of farming. So thank you.
Thank you, Andre, for that excellent presentation and sharing your insights with us. And I'm so glad that you referred to Professor Dr. Rattan Lal several times. And we are very honored, sir, to have Dr. Rattan Lal. Namaskar, Rattan Lal ji. A warm welcome to you to this webinar. And I'd like to hand over the floor to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was a really pleasure listening to Andre, his presentation. So I'm going to share my slides, and please enable my screen share. It says the host has to help me with screen share.
Just, I might have to stop my share.
Yeah. Maybe that's, okay.
Can you do it now, Dr. Lau?
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Can you see my screen? Is the screen visible?
Not yet, sir.
Not yet. Okay. So I'll try again. I think Andre's is still open. I'll try again. Can you see it now?
Yes, sir, we can see it. It's coming
Okay,
up.
good. Thank you. Now I can put the view graph on. All right. Is it working now?
Yes, Professor Lal.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to you this morning. And I did have some clash of schedule, and I talked to the other group only for a few minutes so I could join you here. And I'm glad that I got to listen to Andre's presentation. I want to begin with a quotation from Mahatma Gandhi, who said, to forget how to dig the earth and to tend the soil is to forget ourselves. And I think that's a very good quotation. He stated very clearly that forgetting how to manage soil could be really very serious issue. So let's look at India's food production, which is really a very big global success story. In 1947, the population was 330 million. The food grain production was 50 million tons. And at present, population is 1.4 billion. And the food grain production is 300 million tons. Population went up by a factor of 4.2. I wish it had not gone up that much, but the food production went up by a factor of 6. And another good thing is that India really can double its food grain production by better agriculture to almost 600 million tons. That's the technical potential possible. So I must salute Indian farmers, Indian scientists, policymakers, everybody. They did a great job. But this great job also came at a price. There's always a price of everything. There's no such thing as a free lunch. And in case of India, the price was the environmental price: degraded soil, polluted water, impure air. Air, I do not have to tell anybody, those living in Delhi know what I'm talking about. And of course, the loss of biodiversity. And these are the challenges that every individual everywhere in the world, but especially in India, has to really take personal responsibility. Farmers, scientists, policymakers, each one of us are a culprit and a victim both. And we have to realize that. Soil degradation in India, water erosion 64 million hectare, vegetation degradation 40 million hectare, wind erosion another 9, water logging salinity and alkalinity, acidity, some other complex problems. And many of the problems that I am concerned with, like depletion of soil organic matter content, brick making, urbanization, they are not even listed in the statistics. So it is a serious issue. We must consider water quality, resources. We must consider air quality, issue of air pollution, beautiful capital of Delhi. These days, sometimes you can't even see from very far. So the question is, how should we reconcile the need to advance food and nutritional security with the necessity of improving the environment? We are one of the greatest food exporter of the world. Nobody would have ever believed it in the 1960s when India was considered a begging bowl. We have shown that India can do miracles. Now we have also to show that we can improve the environment. Improving food and not improving the environment is trading one problem with another one. It's something we cannot ignore. Another thing which is very critical to remember is that the health of soil, plants, animals, people, environment, and the planet is one and indivisible. When the health of soil goes down, the health of everything else goes down with it. The other part that I'd like everybody to know, especially India being very religious, and I do not mean religion only one, whether it's a Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, all religions have one thing in common: protect natural resources, respect Mother Earth. Each and every religion say that. But one other thing which I would like to mention from the religious perspective, that the root-soil interface at a nanoscale is the only site in the universe which has the divine powers to resurrect death into life. And that's a fact. And we should not take away from soil the divine power of resurrecting death into life. And that's what we are doing when we degrade its quality. I think André mentioned about the global carbon cycle. He explained it, but I want to show you some numbers. Atmosphere contains 880 gigaton at the moment. About 20 years ago, when I started writing, 2004, it was only about 700 or so. Right now it's 880. Every year we are burning fossil fuel, 10 gigaton. We are also deforesting and adding 1.5 gigaton. So anthropogenically in 2019, we contributed 11 gigaton of carbon into the atmosphere. Fossil fuel, half of that carbon emitted was retained by the atmosphere, 5.1 gigaton. Plants globally sequester through photosynthesis 123 gigaton, some figures 120 approximate every year. Out of that, 60 is respired back almost immediately, and 60 is transferred to soil through roots, and the roots respire back, the microorganism and the roots and other things from soil. The soil carbon stock to 1 meter depth is 2,300. That's about 3 times that of the atmosphere, although decreasing the ratio. Biota, all trees, vegetation is about 560 live, 60 detritus. So in addition to the emission, erosion, serious problem in India, I mentioned, globally, 36 gigaton of sediments carried into the ocean by the world rivers, quite a lot of it carbon. But on way to the ocean, en route to the ocean, about 1.1 gigaton of carbon emitted in the atmosphere. But half of that is taken to the ocean and buried. And sedimentologists, oceanographer who only look how much is going into the ocean, don't think erosion is a good thing. It's depositing carbon into the ocean. Absolutely not. On root, it's also emitting quite a lot of it, and it's also emitting methane and nitrous oxide. So erosion has to be stopped. Soil erosion, I'm talking about, both by wind and water. And from this diagram, we can calculate the mean residence time. In the biota is about 5 years. It's calculated on the basis of pool divided by flux. In soil, it's about 25 years. And in the ocean, it's about 400 years. So ocean is the ultimate graveyard of almost everything. But soil has a more residence time on average than even the vegetation has, the trees. So what I was talking about soil, what it should be, a healthy soil is a living entity. It should have approximately 5 metric ton of live biomass, micro, meso, and macro organism. And that is what makes it healthy. All the 25% of total biodiversity, terrestrial, is in soil, and the misuse and mismanagement is a threat to soil health, especially of the soil biota. Therefore, the objective of soil management is to enhance and strengthen soil's capacity to support life through increasing biodiversity. And this year, World Soil Day was on biodiversity. That was the main focus on the World Soil Day on 5th of December, just last week. And soil organic matter content, here is an example, very dark, fluffy, rich soil with good organic matter content is the essence of soil health and its capacity to support life. Coming back to India, the soils of northwestern region that I am familiar with myself, organic matter content is less than 0.5%. It should be 3 to 4%. So that brings us to the question of what is regenerative agriculture. It is something more than organic because it is encompasses other systems as well. Organics definitely is one of the component of it, but it is something that's inspired by eco-innovation. It's powered by non-carbon energy. It's driven by a circular economy and green infrastructure. It's supported by the recarbonization of the terrestrial biosphere at the bedrock of sustainable development. So that's the key part. The key part is how to re-sequester carbon back into the soil. We have lost 130 gigaton of carbon from agricultural soils over millennia. The question is how to put it back. There's no one way, but whatever way it has to create a positive soil carbon budget. And that brings me to the question of carbon sequestration, the process of transferring atmospheric CO2 into the soil of a land unit plant residue produced, returned back to the same unit, and increasing the over time, the organic matter content of the soil. Soil is like a balance. It's like a bank account. It's like a ledger. If you want your bank account to go up, what you put into the soil, I'm talking about the currency of soil, organic matter. Now, what you put organic matter into the soil, either as biochar, compost, cover crop, root biomass, crop residue, whatever else biomass, must always be more than what is withdrawn from the soil by erosion, leaching, decomposition. Erosion we must stop. That means, now many times I hear, especially people from India, oh, but whatever we do, the organic matter can never go up. It never goes up because you never put more into the soil than you're losing from the soil. So first decrease this and increase this. You must know what this is. If you want your bank account to go up, you should know how much you are withdrawing from the bank for paying your rent, for paying your tuition, for your grocery bill, electricity bill. Try to minimize wherever you can. But if you want your bank account to go up, what you deposit must be more than that. If you deposit less than what you're taking, and then say your bank account doesn't go up, you obviously know why it doesn't go up. Unfortunately, in most cases, when we are talking about resource poor farmers who take away everything from the land. They take away residue, they take away dung for other purposes. They even graze the stubble and burn whatever is left. And the losses in the meantime keep increasing. We have this depletion situation. So the policymakers, general public, farmers, manager must do whatever they can to create this situation. And that takes a lot of thinking. André talked about the rates of carbon sequestration. I summarize them here. On a global scale, the average rate of wetland restoration, you can go then more than 1 ton. Afforestation, I'm talking about soil, I'm not talking about above ground. Even home launch turf, no-till on the average is about half a ton, but can go more if you include with cover crops and lay farming that we heard in Australia, lay farming, combined pastures, and other. Rangeland management also better, grazing system. Rates are less primarily because rangeland are mostly in drier climate. So those are the rates, and this is picture of my own experiment in Nigeria in 1971, exactly 50 years ago. And I was growing corn and cowpeas. These are cowpeas, not soybeans, leaving the crop residue of corn back. And I tried this setup on a watershed basis. I had some plots of 5 hectares. And with this system, even up to 15% slope, there was no erosion, there was no runoff. And it worked very well. But if we took away the crop residue, and here is this similar experiment, only about 100 meters away. This experiment started in 72. I took this picture in 87 when I was living. The difference between the plot in the foreground and the background is that for the 15 years, we took away the crop residue completely. Fertilizer rate is the same, variety is the same, date of planting is the same. Because we took away the crop residue, the soil in the foreground is dead. The living organism, earthworms, termites, centipedes, millipedes, their food was taken away. Just half a meter away, the crop residue was left behind. So you can see the differences between the two. And this experiment has been repeated elsewhere. I'll show you an example. So soil biota is the bio-engine of the earth. And soil biota requires food like we require food. And the food is crop residue, root biomass. When we take away everything or we burn it, we kill the organism and we starve them. And that's the problem. So in Coshocton, Ohio, we had the same experiment. Josh Beniston, my graduate student, 6 feet 8 inch tall, and a crop which was no-till farming since 70s. In 2004, we stopped keeping the residue. We started taking it away, simulating bioethanol production from the residue. And in 2012, we had a serious drought, 8 years after we started the process of removing the residue. And exactly 2 meters away, Josh's plot is where the residue was kept back. Soil moisture content, erosion control, soil temperature. In this soil, temperature is 10 degrees centigrade higher of soil than in this soil. So the plant environment is much better. So that is climate resilient soil, climate smart soil. Returning the residue, increasing other way of doing things. Unfortunately, in India, I can show you many examples where the residue is taken away. Farmers need to feed cattle. They sometimes need to do their cooking. Therefore, if we want them to do this, we have to compensate them for doing this, not punish them for not doing it, but compensate them. And that's the way. So I talk about carbon at the no-till farming in Ohio with the same system, growing a cover crop, rye in this case. We can grow legumes. which is much better option because it fixes nitrogen. So I am not saying that we can completely eliminate fertilizer, but we can reduce them considerably. The slogan should be CNPK. C comes before NPK. And with C being better, the need for NPK will progressively decrease over time. And that is what we need to do. CNPK rather than NPK. And one example to see how that may look like, you have a plant which is improved, and contrary to the plants of the Green Revolution era, which had a short statured, more grains than straw, I think we may have to rethink that thing. We need more straw as well, and we need straw which is resistant to decomposition. We need deeper root system. Deeper the root system, the better it is. We need roots which have association with mycorrhiza, and we need plants that we can detect signals when they are under stress, both biotic and abiotic stress. Those signals can be detected remote sensely over large areas, so that we can intervene by whatever needs to be done to alleviate that stress. The land should never be plowed. All the crop residue must be left back on the soil as a mulch. A cover crop should be grown in the off season, and these crops must be integrated with trees and livestock as a mechanism to recycle the nutrients. If the soil organic matter content is improved, soil biodiversity is increased, like the picture I showed you before, these soil will become disease suppressive soil. And disease suppressive soil obviously do not require as much pesticide as any other soil would require. So this is what the normal system should look like. And then if you do require additional water and nutrients at some critical stage, it should be spoon-fed, applied directly to the plant roots when needed and as much needed, so that most of it is absorbed by the plants and not leak out into the environment. It's leakage into the environment which is a major issue, and we must avoid it. So first of all, try to reduce the dependence as much as you can, but if it is necessary on the basis of soil test and expected yield and the requirement, it should be applied by precision agriculture system in a way that is absorbed by plants and not leaked out into the environment. Organic matter content, the range is about 3% in the root zone. Unfortunately, in soils of India, it is somewhere about 0.2%, 0.5% at the most. And if we can improve the soil health, we can do many other things on soil health and functionality by restoring organic matter content to the critical range, depend climate change adaptation mitigation, food and nutritional security, both quantity and quality, biodiversity, which is now the theme of the Global Biodiversity Conference, and of course, water resources, quality and quantity, they all depend on soil. Showing you this model, US EPA does have a Clean Air Act. We do also have a Clean Water Act. We do not have a Healthy Soil Act, no Soil Quality Act. I don't think it is possible to have clean air and clean water without having healthy soil. So I'm hoping that the next Farm Bill will consider Soil Quality Act, and then that trinity of 3 acts, Soil Quality Act, Air Quality Act, Water Quality, should become a model to be adopted everywhere else in the world, especially in developing countries such as India. We need those trinity of acts. And our scriptures say that, by the way. Whether it's Upanishad, like Purana Upanishad, Kshati, Jal, Pavak, Gagan, Samira. Kshati, soil, Jal, Pavak, energy, Gagan, space, Samira, wind, Panch Tattva. These 5 elements are Adam Sharira. Human body is made of those 5 elements. How can you desecrate it? But those three elements, soil, water, air, the best place you can find them is in Gurbani. Paun Guru, Pani Pita, Mata Dhart Mahat. Even if you read Quran, it says, do not waste water even if you live on a river. Do not waste food because Allah does not like the wastefulness. In Judaism, the word Adam means soil, name Adam. The humus mean the organic matter content. That's what means Homo sapiens. That's where it comes from. So it doesn't matter what religion you think about. We always look at the differences among religion. It's a time that we think about the commonalities among them. And the commonality is protection, restoration, management, improvement of soil health. That's common amongst all of them, which is also the engine of economic development. If we did things right in India, irrigated land area, 70 million hectare, we use 200 kilometer cube of water. Excessive flood irrigation in a dry climate like Punjab, Haryana, UP, Rajasthan, that's a serious mistake. If it's a policy to give free electricity, that's a wrong policy. We can use drip irrigation, micro irrigation, any other thing, improve the area over time, and yet decrease the water use, so that our water table in the Indo-Gangetic plain is not going down more than 1 meter a year. Fertilizer use right now 30 million ton. If we improve soil health and soil quality, there is no reason, even with doubling of the grain production, that the fertilizer could not be less than half of what we currently use, maybe less. In-field burning of residue, it's 100 million ton now, especially October, November, rice straw. By 2030, it should be zero. But that's not by coercion. We know, we have seen what had that done to the protest from the farmers last week and week before. It is reward those who do not burn. And then those who are burning, they will see that the others are being rewarded. That's a policy. And I suggested $20 per acre per year, about 1,500 rupees per acre per year for doing better agriculture. Pesticide use right now 56,000 tons. It should really come down by creating disease suppressive soil, so we don't have to poison the environment as much. Our crop yield globally, 2 tons, it can be very easily doubled, very easily. And that's why the grain production from 300 million ton to about 600 million ton by the end of this century or before. Unfortunately, the post-harvest losses we have are 30 to 40%. We should have a slogan of reducing those losses to 10%. There is no reason to keep producing more and more when we can't take care of what we produce. And I see that horrible scene of grain stacked up in gunny bag under a tarpaulin whenever I travel from Delhi to Ludhiana or Chandigarh. That loss is unforgivable. That's a crime against nature, actually. There's no other word for it. Organic manure, right now we use 200 million ton. It should be aimed at going to 400 million ton by 2040, 2050, and eventually to 500. That will cut down the fertilizer use. So these are kind of planning that we should do. ICR, Indian Council of Agriculture Research, has got the biggest award on World Soil Day, 5th of December. It's called King Bhumipal Atulyatej Award for improving soil health. I think they should have a strategy of adopting a table like this over time to improve soil health and demonstrate that that award is really motivating the Indian management to improve soil health. Reduce the chemical over time, recycle the waste, and that's the strategy that our 5-year plan should have. Hopefully it can be done. Global potential of carbon sequestration soils of the world is about 2.5 gigaton, a billion ton of carbon per year through better management. If we did this on globally between now and 2100, next 80 years, soil can sequester 180 gigaton. Vegetation, especially lower Himalaya, Shivalik hills, if everything is gone back on steep hills under trees through afforestation, Globally, that potential is 150. But think again from the Indian perspective, all the way from Afghanistan to Cambodia, if the lower Himalayas were covered by forest as they were 100, 200 years ago, the flood drought problem that we are suffering now from, we have flood in September, October, terrible flood everywhere, and then dry season, we have no water anywhere. Even Cherrapunji has no water in 1 month of dry season, the rainfall of 500 inches. So somewhere we can also mitigate climate change. This strategy will not offset 10 gigaton of fossil fuel, but if we can find no carbon fuel sources in next 20, 30 years, and then adopt this system of terrestrial carbon sequestration in soil and vegetation, the climate change can be addressed, and land can be solution toward that issue. Policies part, I think we can think about stewardship, we can think about legal, we can think about economic. All those three are option. Stewardship is the best. I already mentioned all of our religions say that. Personally, I think soil stewardship and care must be embedded in every fruit and vegetable eaten, in each grain ground into the bread consumed, in every cup of water drunk, in every breath of air inhaled, in every scenic landscape cherished. We must make this as a part of curricula right from the primary school, middle school, secondary school, environment, soil, everything. Go back to our roots, whatever the roots may be. This is the best kind of scripture that we can think about. And the food price, although we'd like to make it cheaper, if you want to protect nature, maybe consumers should be paying for that. Who else is going to pay for it if we don't? And then I would also like to consider rights of soil. Just as rights of human, rights of animal, there must also be rights of soil, because soil is a living thing. A dead soil doesn't produce anything, and I showed you pictures of that. So being the essence of all life, soil must have a right to be protected, restored, thrive, and managed judiciously. I really like Pope Francis very much. He has come up about these things, sadness that he sees what is happening in his own home continent. I think we need religious leaders like him to indicate that soil is a living entity, and endangering soil is not right. Specifically for India, I have some do's and don'ts. You have to take them with a grain of salt, but we must stop in-field burning of residue. We must stop flood-based irrigation. That's like waterboarding the plants. For 2-3 days, wheat is completely flooded. The root can't breathe. Removal of topsoil for brick making. By the way, both brick making and flood irrigation was practiced by Mohenjo-daro and Harappa about 5,000 years ago. We are still doing that. We may have replaced Shadoof and Persian wheel with a pump, even with a solar panel. That's not modernization. The modernization is putting water where it belongs, in the root zone, through sub-irrigation like Israel has done. Broadcasting fertilizer and standing water on the soil has to stop. That's a economic jeopardy and ecological tragedy in a way. Most of the nitrogen goes up in the air or in the runoff immediately. Plowing, puddling of soil in northwestern India, really we should find something else to grow there. Vegetable is a good option, cotton maybe. But puddling and plowing the land in a desert area, what do you expect? What's going to happen to the water? Yes, I realize that growing rice there without puddling, you will have 10-15% less yield, but imagine how much you save in terms of water and other resources. Besides, if you're going to harvest rice and soak it in the tarpaulin in a very first rain, why are we producing it in the first place? Traditional fuel should be replaced, give housewives clean cooking fuel. Everybody's cattle graze everywhere, that has to stop. I know nobody likes to stop those kind of things, but that's the kind of discipline which is going to be required. Storing grain under open field under plastic cover, subsidy for flood irrigation and nitrogen fertilizer. These are wrong kind of subsidies. And the use of crop residue when you take it away is something we must. Reverse of those are do's: conservation agriculture, which I showed you picture, recycling of crop residue and animal waste on the land, that's where it belongs, provide clean cooking fuel to the rural community, protect prime agriculture land against urbanization. I'm really, really concerned. Our cities are expanding like anything, and the best soil is going on either brick making or under cities. We must map out agricultural land and protect it, make it illegal to keep encroaching. All the hills greater than 7-10% slope should go under trees on a permanent basis. We must revise the curricula right from primary school onward to teach soil and environmental education. We must pay farmer for ecosystem services, not as a subsidy, not as a handout, not as a political slogan. If you do good things, we will pay you. You don't do good thing, you will not get it. And that's the way to do it. It will happen eventually, but start paying farmers, and when 2 or 3 or 5 are paid, other will see that it is being rewarded, and society has to be willing to pay. We must encourage religious organization again, preach something about ethics of land. That's a common thing amongst all religion. Don't talk about differences, talk about commonality. And we must have a very good dialogue with policymakers so they understand what they have to do. And we must involve communities and panchayat as a media for soil restoration. I really want to thank you for the opportunity to talk to you. I'll be very glad to answer any question that may be, but I may also have to leave very soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Dr. Rattan Lal, and very nice to hear what you said about rights of soil, Healthy Soil Act, and disease suppressive soils. So lots of action points for all of us in India. And with that action points and how Solidaridad Asia plans to take all this knowledge and the great insights from you and André forward, I'd like to bring Prashant in very quickly. I know we have lots of questions in the box. So Prashant, can you come in quickly and give us a perspective from Solidaridad Asia?
Rajiv, thank you very much. And it was a great pleasure to hear both Professor Andrew and Professor Rattan Lal. I think they have covered most of it, and I'm looking into the time and the number of questions. We have a small it would be good to have all the questions, but one of the point I would like to reiterate from Solidaridad Asia that soil and soil degradation has been one of the key focus area, and across the region in all our agriculture interventions, this is one of the fundamental point we were trying to address, and it's been challenging because the dichotomy of the feeding the future and continuously growing it's a very complex thing. But the previous seminar on the regenerative agriculture and the reiteration of point from both and Professor Andrew and Professor Lal has been giving us a path to how we can move forward. Because for us, we believe, even in the coming future, in our new multi-annual strategic plans, also the achieving food security is critical. But it's not just it cannot be just ensuring the food security, but we have to keep focus on that. The fundamentals such as soil on which the food is grown is very important, because this has been a source for nourishment. And if we read the studies, there are 95% of our calories come from soil, and it is the foundation for even the buildings we build. And the whole conception this is going to always be there is something which is we need to kind of rethink. That it's always there, but it needs to be we can't take it for granted. Like the FAO study which is done in South Asia, and that makes it furthermore important for all our supply chain intervention, that it has seen that almost like US 10 billion annual loss of revenue because of the land degradation. And it has been beautifully pointed out by both Professor Lal and Andrew, that if we can bring the soil pivot in the centrality of the programming, it becomes very important. And because the efficient soils provides the largest storage for terrestrial carbon, and functional soils plays a key role in the sink for the clean water, and soil provide the dynamic ecosystem, the biodiversity very critical, and the food supply, the human, plant, and animal life depends on it. So with this, I would say that Solidaridad Asia recognizes the soil degradation and land degradation as a key component. We would like to take this expertise into the programming. So maybe after this seminar, together with our other experts, we would like to continue the conversation with both the dignitaries, with you, your institute also, and possibilities to look for a tangible collaboration where we can really develop certain things which can be helpful in creating the path which you have both showed in your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prashant. Well, there are lots of questions. So what I'll try and do is I'll just take a few because we have about 10 minutes left. And we'll try to pick up the questions, and if Anumita can help me, and we will maybe mail it to the respective people for answer. So the first question I'd like to take is from Paul, and I think this question is probably best answered by André, and he's talking about, do you think the benefits of high soil organic carbon is enough to convince farmers to protect and sequester carbon? And he's also linking this to the Australian program of emission reduction. André, can you come in there very briefly?
Okay. I wish it was. Okay. I wish it was enough to convince farmers. Unfortunately, we've got a long way to go for farmers, and also, very importantly, for our authorities and also the people who work with farmers to understand the importance of soils and soil carbon and soil health. The paradigm is just starting to change now, but we're in the early days and we've had the early adopters. But I suppose what I really do want to say, we're talking about food security. If we don't go down this path, we won't have food security. Building up our soils and protecting our soils, and particularly building up our soil organic matter levels, is the way that we can build resilient farming systems to cope with climate extremes, and also do our bit as farmers to start reversing climate change, to get the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and back into the soils where it belongs. In my country, we do have a carbon farming program, but unfortunately at this stage, we just have one farmer certified under it. I showed you, Niels Olsen, he's a friend of mine, who's been paid for it. That's it, out of the millions of hectares. So we have a long way to go.
Thank you. The next question is a bit technical, and that comes from Dr. M.V. Venugopalan, a great agronomist and a scientist from Nagpur, from cotton. His question is related to, and I think this would be a question to Professor Lal, to pedogenic calcium carbonate in soils in semi-arid regions, which sequester carbon, but is not good since exchangeable Na occupies the exchange complex, making them sodic. What would be the best way to revert this phenomena under situations where maintaining soil cover around the year is not possible due to shortage of water? Dr. Lal, that's for you.
Thank you. I think we did not talk about, at least I did not talk about pedogenic carbonate. They are very important, not only formation of what we call secondary carbonate, the same thing, pedogenic carbonate, but also leaching of bicarbonates with good quality irrigation water, rainwater. Those mechanisms both are very good mechanism of carbon sequestration, especially in arid and semi-arid climate. The arid regions right now cover about 45% of the Earth's land area. And by the end of this century, it may be 50%, the way the climate change. So secondary carbonate should be given a very high priority. The way the question is framed, it seems like formation of secondary carbonate is being considered as a negative part. Carbonate is a precipitated form, and when it is precipitate, it's a solid, it's not soluble, it really has very little impact on any of the soil properties because it's a solid component. So that question, whether it is having a negative impact, need to be looked at a little more carefully. I do not think so. Bicarbonates, yes, they are soluble, and they can have impact on salinity as well as on the nutrient absorption, osmosis, etc. And leaching of bicarbonates becomes a priority in those soils. And that is where the good quality irrigation water comes out as very important. But the question of secondary carbonates and leaching of bicarbonate in terms of climate management has not received the attention it deserves and should be given more research priority.
Thank you, Professor Lal. The next question, I suppose André would be in a position to answer, is what would be the short-term motivation for farmers to adopt regenerative farming, moving away from high chemical farming, ecosystems supported and held together by a club of private sector interest? So I suppose this question relates to ecosystem services. How do we motivate farmers? André, would you like to just come in?
Yeah, look, I'd be very happy to do that because I'm also a farmer. You know, the last almost next year will be 50 years. So from the perspective of a farmer, can I say that one of the things that as we change our system, we reduce our production costs. And this is really important because the reality is that no one wants to pay us more. And actually in India, you're in a time at the moment when the government wants to deregulate the markets. I can tell you when markets are deregulated, farmers get less. And especially when you remove minimum prices, that's what they did here in Australia and everywhere else. So for farmers to survive, we have to reduce our production costs. And by building up the soil health, starting to bring in, you know, organic matter, keeping the residue on. You know, Dr. Lal, you know, Professor Lal gave very good examples. What happens is we reduce our costs. We use less fertilizer, less pesticides. We can go over to organic pesticides. We, by increasing soil organic matter, our water use efficiency increases. So there's less water costs. These are all massive costs. End of the day, the money we don't spend is money in the bank. So when we get paid for our crop, we actually have more money at the end of the year. And that is very important to explain to farmers. As a result, and one of the things I want to point out when we talk about regenerative farming, which is a whole suite of farming systems, at the moment around the world, we are losing millions of farmers. Now, India, as you know, there's a diaspora of farmers leaving and going into the cities because they can't make a living. It's the same everywhere. In our area of farming, we are growing farmers. More and more farmers are becoming regenerative because we are viable. And that is a very important point to get across to farmers. We're talking about building viable, resilient systems that, if done properly, make farmers financially viable and more profitable.
Thank you, André. I have a time for a very quick question, and perhaps Professor Lal would be able to answer it. How do we bring behavioral change in farmers? You did mention about payment of ecosystem services, and you've also spoken about carbon farming in the past. Dr. Lal, could you just touch upon this very, very briefly? I know it requires a separate session, but perhaps you could just give us a quick insight.
I'm not a social scientist, I'm a soil physicist, so I can only give you answers which are more generic and general. Behavior is a social issue, so social scientists work on that part. But I think one thing that is education, communication, and by education I don't mean that farmers are ignorant, but some of the innovation discussion with them is very critical. The other part is having community involvement through demonstration, where you can document by showing here is practice, here practice. About giving a picture of the crop residue management. If you leave the residue, moisture conservation, soil temperature, soil health is better. So setting up long-term experiments in different regions of India and documenting and having field day where you Kisan Mela kind of thing, where you demonstrate these good things is, and a very good option of changing behavior is give not subsidy, which can sometimes kind of distort the values, like nitrogen being cheaper than phosphorus and potassium. They put nitrogen but nothing else, and then nitrogen then is ineffective. Flood irrigation incentive subsidy, we give you free electricity. It's a wrong thing to do. So reward farmer for doing good things. That is a very good motivator. If you do not burn, if you leave the residue, if you improve soil organic matter content. One other thing I should give an example, those produce that we buy from good farms, if they have a label that they were grown in a soil with low carbon footprint, or low water footprint, or low environmental footprint, and that label gives a higher price to farmers, that will be a very good motivator. That means consumer have to be willing to pay for it.
Thank you, Dr. Lal. And I think there are many questions. Unfortunately, I'd like to apologize to all the people who asked the questions. There's absolutely no time, but we'll try to club up the questions and reach out to both Professor Lal as well as André, and perhaps reach out bilaterally to the people who've asked the questions. So with that note, I would like to thank everyone, the participants. We've had a great number of participants. Thank you very much for the interest in the topic. Thank you, Professor Lal and André, for having agreed to do this webinar. And Professor Lal, I know we've been very persistent. We've bugged you a lot with emails, but bahut bahut dhanyawad, namaskar, thank you so much. And I would like to thank the Solidaridad Asia team for having put this together. And of course, Shatadru is not at the forefront, but thank you, Shatadru, for your leadership and making this happen. And last but not the least, thank you, Anumita. Thank you, Naina, for all the background work that you've done. And with this, I'd like to say good night, namaskar, and a very good morning and a good day to Professor Lal. We'll reach out to you, sir, as Prashant mentioned, bilaterally to see how we could work together. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.